We've just seen the passage of this foreign aid bill, and I wanted to focus specifically on the implications for Israel here. Critics have said that this is an American green light for more killings in Gaza. Can you respond to that?
Well, I think there is certainly a gap between global public opinion and American public opinion on the subject of what's happening in Gaza today. And by the way, I must emphasize, I speak here as a friend of Israel. It's clear that while Israel was perfectly justified to defend itself, to retaliate against Hamas for the attacks that Hamas carried out and killed many innocent Israeli civilians, I think what's happened so far in Gaza has actually shocked the world. And it's a well-known fact that global public opinion is now calling for greater humanitarian action to save lives of Palestinians, ordinary Palestinians in Gaza. So the world was looking upon the United States to provide leadership in this area because of its special ties with Israel. But as you know, President Joe Biden himself would very much like to see more being done. In fact, there was an article by Nicholas Kristof in the New York Times that said that Joe Biden's wife, Jill Biden, said to him, "Joe, please stop this. Please stop this." It's his wife who's telling Joe Biden to stop this campaign. But it'd be very, very difficult in an elections year for President Joe Biden to go against the formidable influence that Israel has in the United States.
And you mentioned some of the key concerns, not just from Democratic lawmakers, but it also appears from the president's wife about the situation on the ground in Gaza. The United States is implicitly complicit in what's happening there by providing weapons, equipment and ammunition to Israel, is it not?
Well, that's how I think it is being perceived globally. And as you know, we are also going to discuss Tony Blinken's visit to China. The main priority for the United States today is to engage in a global campaign to ensure that it remains far more influential and far more powerful globally than China. That's the number one geopolitical game in town. And what the Gaza war has done is that it has definitely dented America's image in the world, especially in the global south, but also, interestingly enough, in Europe too. There's a lot of very strong feeling that the United States should be doing more to stop the war in Gaza, while of course protecting and defending Israel's legitimate national interests.
I wanted to ask you about your reaction to some of the extraordinary images that we've seen on campuses across the United States with students protesting against the US government's position on Israel and the deaths that we've seen in Gaza. At the same time, the former Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, also joining Chuck Schumer here in calling on Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, to resign. To what extent is this incredibly damaging for President Biden as we come into the November election, and will it have an impact?
Well, as you know, the world, I'm not giving a big secret away, would prefer to see Joe Biden elected over Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump is going to create amazing problems for the world because he's so difficult and unpredictable. So if the world had a vote, they would vote for Joe Biden. And yet, sadly, because he has been seen to be ineffective by many people on the Gaza issue, it's possible that he could lose, as you know, some very crucial swing states, like Michigan, for example, where there's a very strong Arab-American population. They don't have to vote for Trump. They have to not vote, and that would make a difference. Or Pennsylvania and a few other swing states. So it'd be a tragedy for President Joe Biden were he to lose the elections because of the Gaza issue. So if I was advising him privately, I would say this is the time for him to appear to look very strong and decisive in saying these are strong American interests in ensuring greater support for humanitarian operations in Gaza. He can take a perfectly strong stand on that. the world would support him, and I think many in the American population would support him, and that's also how he can get re-elected in the United States of America. So many people are sort of puzzled at his lack of willingness to be strong and decisive, even in supporting greater humanitarian aid for the people of Gaza.
Of course, just to counter what you're saying, Trump supporters would suggest that he indeed has the solutions to solve this problem, but we won't get into that conversation. I also wanted to ask you about what's happening with China here, because the US President Joe Biden and the Democrats are using TikTok as a 2024 campaign tool, yet the president is now being asked to sign off on this TikTok ban or to force the sale of this app. What does the timeline look like here? Will it happen before the US election, and what impact is it going to have on US-China relations?
Well, I think TikTok itself is not going to be a major factor in US-China relations, but paradoxically, it could become a bigger factor in the elections, because it's very, very clear. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there are 125 million users of TikTok in the United States, and many of them are young people who are quite wedded to TikTok. And as you know, even though in theory Donald Trump is opposed to TikTok also, but he has actually not called for the banning of TikTok because he's trying to court the young voters. So I think President Joe Biden should ensure that he doesn't lose the young voters of the United States, because that's very, very critical for him. But TikTok is frankly a sideshow in the larger US-China geopolitical context, because let's be clear about one thing. The main geopolitical game in town over the next 10 years will be the geopolitical contest between United States and China. And it's going to accelerate over the next 10 years. Now, the good news is that there's a temporary lull this year, and in fact, it's reflected in the fact that Tony Blinken can now have a normal visit to China. For many years, normal interactions between US and China just couldn't happen. But now they are happening, and that's a good sign. So this year, hopefully, will be a stable year in US-China relations. But even on this issue, President Joe Biden is walking a tightrope, because while he's trying to stabilize the relationship with China, he's got to protect himself from Trump saying, there goes Joe Biden, he's weak on China again. So it's a very difficult political game. A very difficult political game for Joe Biden to play now.